Sometimes, a man's story is written not in words, but in scars. Early morning sunlight slipped across the rolling hills of Cotswold Vale, catching the dew on the grass and glinting off the neat white fences that lined the stables. The air smelled of hay and old wood, tinged with the faintest promise of rain. In the silence, broken only by the occasional snort or shuffle from the stalls, Arthur Pendleton moved quietly from one end of the stable to the other, his boots muffled by sawdust, his motions deliberate, almost reverent. He was an unremarkable figure at first glance, sturdy, slightly stooped, hair going silver at the temples. But anyone looking closer might notice the careful way he used his hands, the faded scars trailing across his knuckles, and the way his eyes seemed to drift far away, as if following a memory only he could see. Arthur stopped at the last stall, where a chestnut mare tossed her head and pawed at the ground. Her name was Tempest, and she was beautiful in the wild, unpredictable way of something never truly tamed. She bared her teeth, stamped, and snorted, eyes rolling whites like a warning. But Arthur only watched her with a quiet patience. He set a fresh bucket of water in her stall, careful not to make sudden moves, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were fierce, almost angry, and his, underneath the calm, flashed with something broken and defiant. Tempest let out a piercing whinny, rearing up so suddenly that Arthur jerked back, heart pounding. The sound echoed off the wooden rafters. For a moment, he wasn't in Cotswold Vale at all, but somewhere else entirely. The roar of a crowd, the thunder of hooves, the blinding sun, the sudden, impossible pain. He flinched, shaking his head as if he could clear it. He moved to the feed room, where, tucked away on a high shelf, a battered cardboard box waited. Arthur hesitated, then pulled it down. Inside were his old trophies, polished silver, dulled brass, ribbons faded with time. He traced the names, Cheltenham, Ascot, even a royal cup or two, feeling the old pride twist together with an ache that never left. There was a photograph, too, a younger Arthur grinning beside a horse who looked a little like Tempest, sunlight in his eyes, possibility ahead of him. He closed the box, swallowing hard. Those days were gone. Now he was just the stable manager. He'd kept his head down, worked hard, never so much as set a foot in a saddle since the accident. He told himself he liked it that way. But in the quiet moments, it felt like hiding. Back in the main stable, Arthur heard footsteps and the low rumble of a familiar voice. "She give you any trouble this morning?" Alistair, the owner of Cotswold Vale, stood in the doorway, arms folded, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Arthur shook his head, forcing a grin. "She keeps me on my toes, that's for sure," he said, voice steady, but there was a tremor in his hand as he patted Tempest's neck, too quickly, as the mare shied away. Alistair watched him, eyes lingering on the scars. "You know, we've got the Cotswold Open coming up," he said. "People say Tempest is untrainable, but I don't buy it. With the right rider? Well, it's not my place to say." Arthur tensed. No. The idea prickled like a rash, but he forced himself to laugh, waving it off. "I'm too old for that circus," he muttered. But Alistair only shrugged. "Maybe so," he said. "But she's wasted in that stall. And you, well, some people are meant for more than mucking out." He left, whistling, the sound trailing off through the open door. Arthur stood in silence. He could feel the weight of the trophies in that box, the eyes of the mare watching him, wild and wary. He reached for the brush, determined to lose himself in work, but his mind kept circling back to the same place, the day everything changed. He'd been at the top once. Headlines, interviews, the thrill of victory in his veins. Then came the fall. One split second, one slip in the mud, and a world of pain. The doctors said he was lucky. He could walk after all. But something had broken inside, something he'd never been able to mend. Since then, every hoofbeat sounded like a countdown, every horse a reminder. A sudden clatter snapped him back. Tempest was at it again, kicking at the door, eyes wild with a kind of hunger. Or was it fear? Arthur stepped forward, voice low. "Easy, girl, easy." But she only tossed her head, nostrils flaring. He tried to soothe her, but every touch felt wrong. Frustration surged. Why couldn't he do this? Why did the ghosts of the past refuse to let him go? For a moment, it seemed like Tempest was mocking him, refusing to be calmed by a man too afraid to ride. He lingered in the stable after the others had gone, cleaning, checking locks, delaying the empty silence of his little flat above the barn. He watched the sun go down through the high windows, painting the hay golden, and wondered what it would feel like to be brave again. Just once. Later, as he locked up for the night, Arthur glanced back at Tempest. She stood in the shadows, restless, untamed. There was a kind of kinship there, a recognition. Both of them held back by wounds no one else could see. He paused, keys jangling in his hand. Maybe, he thought, there was a reason their paths had crossed. But he shook his head, turning away, determined not to hope. Not tonight. Still, as he walked up the stairs, Arthur heard the distant echo of hoofbeats, not from the past, but from something waiting, just out of sight, in the dark. Arthur barely slept. The night felt endless, haunted by old memories and the echo of Alistair's words. When dawn finally crawled across the hills, pale and uncertain, he was already awake, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for something to change. The world outside was muffled by fog, the kind that made everything feel suspended, trapped between yesterday and tomorrow. Down in the stable, the horses stirred restlessly, nickering for their morning feed. Arthur went through the motions: hay, water, grain, but his mind kept circling the thought he'd tried to push away. The Cotswold Open. Tempest, the wild mare who never let anyone close. Alistair's challenge, delivered as a gentle suggestion but hanging in the air like a dare. By the time he reached Tempest's stall, the sun had just started to burn away the fog. She was pacing, muscles tight beneath her copper coat, eyes sharp and suspicious. Arthur stood for a moment, watching her. Something in her restless energy felt familiar, like looking in a cracked mirror. He leaned against the door, arms crossed, lost in thought. "Maybe it's time," he muttered, not sure if he was talking to her or himself. He finished his chores, but instead of heading back upstairs, Arthur wandered into the indoor arena, an echoing space of sand and old sunlight. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed only by the quiet sound of his boots. For years, he'd avoided this place unless he had to check the equipment or supervise a new worker. Today, he unlocked the door to Tempest's stall and let her follow him inside, keeping his steps slow, non-threatening. She snorted, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling in suspicion. For a moment, Arthur hesitated, hands trembling slightly. Then he took a deep breath, steadied himself, and faced her, meeting those wild, amber eyes. He carried a long dressage whip, standard for training a difficult horse. But as he stepped into the circle, something inside him rebelled. He tossed the whip aside, the sound sharp in the hush of the arena. Instead, he spread his hands, empty, letting her see he meant no harm. Tempest tensed, watching every movement. Arthur lowered his gaze, softening his body, trying to communicate calm through posture and breath. It felt ridiculous, a grown man talking to a horse in silence. But as the minutes ticked by, something began to shift. He kept his movements slow and deliberate, never reaching or grabbing, just waiting, letting her come to him if she wanted. Minutes stretched, each one thick with tension, broken only by the steady rhythm of their breathing. Finally, Tempest took a single, cautious step forward. Arthur didn't move, didn't speak. She snorted, tossing her head, but instead of bolting, she edged closer, drawn by curiosity or perhaps some deeper, wordless recognition. When her muzzle finally brushed his outstretched hand, Arthur felt a surge of hope, fragile but real. He let her linger, barely moving, letting her scent him, trusting her as much as he dared. After a long, suspended moment, Tempest allowed him to stroke her neck, her muscles quivering beneath his fingers. But she did not pull away. He almost laughed. The relief was that strong, but he just stood there, holding his breath, savoring the victory. When she stepped back, Arthur didn't follow. He let her go, honoring the boundary, not wanting to push too far. Later, in the tack room, Arthur found himself staring at the old sign-up sheets for the Cotswold Open, tacked to a bulletin board by the door. Names he recognized, some young, some old, a few he'd beaten, more he hadn't, and, at the bottom, a blank space for new entrants. He didn't remember picking up the pen, but suddenly his name was there, shaky but unmistakable. Arthur Pendelton. Next to it, he wrote Tempest. The decision landed in his chest like a stone. Was it madness? Maybe. But the idea burned brighter than his fear. For the first time in years, he felt something alive inside him, something daring him to try. Word spread fast. By lunchtime, Eleanor Finch, Alistair's wife, the closest thing Cotswold Vale had to a den mother, cornered Arthur in the office. "You signed up?" she said, eyes wide with disbelief. "With Tempest?" Arthur just nodded, voice quiet but sure. "I'm not saying it's smart, but I have to try." Eleanor shook her head, a reluctant smile breaking through. "Alistair's got you all figured out, hasn't he?" she teased. Then her expression softened. "I hope you know what you're doing." Arthur shrugged. "I don't, but I can't keep hiding forever." That afternoon, he returned to the arena with Tempest. The early success faded quickly. The mare wasn't going to make things easy. She bucked, spun, tried to bite, bolted to the far end of the ring more than once. Arthur's patience was tested, his confidence wavered, and more than once he considered quitting. But each time he forced himself to slow down, breathe, remember the lesson from the morning. Respect, not dominance. They repeated the process, hour after hour. Tempest would edge close, let him touch her neck, then bolt away at the slightest wrong move. He adapted, watching her cues, letting her set the pace. Sometimes she surprised him. Once, she nuzzled his shoulder, almost shy. Another time, she let him guide her in a slow circle, hooves whispering across the sand. The failures were quick, humiliating, Tempest tossing her head, nearly flattening him against the wall. The breakthroughs were rare but electric, stretching out time, making the hard moments worth enduring. By sunset, Arthur was exhausted, sweat trickling down his back, muscles aching in ways he'd forgotten. Tempest stood at the far end of the ring, sides heaving, but her gaze was different, less angry, more searching, as if she was trying to decide whether to trust him after all. As he led her back to the stall, Eleanor watched from the doorway, arms folded, a gentle smile on her lips. "You two look like you've been through a war," she said. Arthur grinned, wiping his brow. "It's only the first day." She reached out, squeezing his shoulder. "You know, Arthur, sometimes it's not about winning. Sometimes it's about showing up." He nodded, unsure if he believed her, but grateful all the same. That night, as he sat alone in his small flat, Arthur replayed the day in his mind. The failures stung, but the moments of connection, however brief, lingered. He looked at his hands, at the scars and calluses, and wondered what it would take to really start over. Downstairs, Tempest stamped in her stall, restless. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Arthur was ready to meet it. Not as the man he once was, but as the man he might become. He didn't see the figure standing in the shadows outside the barn, watching through the slats, eyes glinting with something sharp and hungry. But he would soon enough. Every small town had its rituals, and in Cotswold Vale, nothing brought people together like the social gatherings before a big event. The pre-tournament party at Ashcroft Manor was always the same. Laughter echoing through high-ceilinged rooms, crystal glasses clinking, the scent of roast lamb and old money in the air. Tonight, though, Arthur Pendelton lingered near the doorway, hands tucked awkwardly in his pockets, wishing he could blend into the woodwork. He felt out of place among the well-dressed crowd, his work shirt and faded jeans at odds with the tailored blazers and crisp dresses swirling around him. Alistair had insisted he come. "It's good for folks to see you're really back, Arthur." And Eleanor had even found him a tie, but nothing could make him feel less like an outsider. He watched as acquaintances from another life drifted past, their eyes flicking over him, some with curiosity, a few with skepticism. At the far end of the room, a sudden burst of laughter made Arthur glance up. He saw Marcus Thorne for the first time in years, surrounded by a knot of admirers, gesturing animatedly, drink in hand. Marcus was everything Arthur was not. Tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a navy suit that looked custom-made. His laughter rang out too loud, calculated to draw attention. The man had aged well, lines around his eyes giving him a kind of rugged charm, but there was something predatory in the set of his mouth. Arthur stiffened, remembering old races, older grudges. Marcus had always been second best, never quite fast enough, always nipping at Arthur's heels. When Arthur fell, Marcus hadn't called, hadn't written, but word had come back, whispered through stables and tack rooms, that Marcus was glad to see his rival finally out of the way. Now, as Marcus caught sight of Arthur, his eyes gleamed with recognition and something like amusement. He made his way over, his group dispersing in his wake. The crowd seemed to hush, as if expecting a show. "Well, well," Marcus drawled, swirling the ice in his glass. "If it isn't the legend himself, I heard a rumor, didn't believe it at first, that you'd signed up for the Open. With that mare, what's her name? Tempest?" Arthur kept his expression neutral, jaw tight. "That's right." Marcus smiled thinly, taking a sip, eyes never leaving Arthur's. "People are calling her a maniac, you know. Dangerous, even by your standards. Bit ambitious, don't you think?" Arthur's hands tightened around his drink. "We'll see." The words hung between them, electric, as if they were back at the starting line, the world waiting for the gate to drop. Marcus leaned in, voice lowering. "Tell me, Arthur, what's it like coming back from the dead? Most men would have quit after a fall like yours. Some would say it's foolish to tempt fate twice." Arthur's knuckles whitened. For a moment the room spun, the noise receding until all he could hear was his own heartbeat, and a sudden, sharp memory. Mud, hooves, the sky spinning overhead. He forced himself to breathe. Marcus smiled, the gesture all teeth. You know, if you need any pointers, I'm always happy to lend a hand. Or maybe a safer horse. Arthur met his gaze, letting the silence stretch. I'll manage. Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment. Then, with a quick, dismissive laugh, he clapped Arthur on the shoulder, just a little too hard. Well, best of luck out there. Don't break anything important this time. Arthur watched him walk away, the weight of old grudges settling like a stone in his chest. Around him, the party resumed its usual rhythm, but Arthur felt the shift. The glances, the whispered speculations. The word was out. Arthur Pendelton was back, and Marcus Thorne did not like it. As the evening wore on, Arthur drifted through the crowd, every encounter tinged with awkwardness. Some old friends greeted him warmly. Others kept their distance, as if his misfortune might be contagious. Alistair, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood. Ignore Marcus, he murmured, pressing a drink into Arthur's hand. He's all bluster. You and Tempest. You've got something he'll never understand. Arthur smiled thinly but said nothing. It was easier to disappear, to become invisible. He slipped out onto the terrace, letting the night air cool his face. Far off, he could hear the faint sounds of horses moving in the dark, the comforting rhythms of a world that made more sense to him than this glittering crowd. Eleanor found him there, her heels clicking softly on the stone. She leaned on the railing beside him. You don't have to prove anything to them, you know. Arthur looked at her, the question unspoken. She answered anyway, voice gentle. I mean it. This isn't about Marcus, or your past, or what anyone thinks. It's about you and Tempest. That's all that matters. He wanted to believe her. He wanted it to be true. But as he stared into the dark, he felt the old doubts curling up inside him. Was he doing this for himself? Or just to prove to the world that he wasn't finished? Suddenly, laughter erupted behind them. Marcus telling another story, the punchline ringing out like a challenge. Arthur flinched, the old injury throbbing in his leg, a phantom pain he couldn't shake. He remembered the hospital, the doctors, the months of recovery. He remembered Marcus's face, triumphant, not at the win, but at Arthur's defeat. Eleanor touched his arm. Come on, Arthur, let's go home. Tomorrow's another day. They left quietly, unnoticed by most. As Arthur climbed into the old Land Rover, he glanced back at the manor, windows blazing with light. Inside, Marcus was probably holding court, spinning his own story. But Arthur didn't care about stories anymore. He cared about Tempest, about the way her wildness reflected his own. He cared about the possibility of redemption, not in the eyes of others, but in his own heart. The drive home was silent, the night pressing in on all sides. Eleanor dozed against the window, trusting him to find the way. Arthur's hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, everything felt unmoored. Back at the stable, he checked on Tempest. She greeted him with a toss of her head, eyes bright in the dim light. Arthur stroked her neck, feeling the tension drain away. It's just you and me, he whispered. They can say what they want, but we're not finished yet. Tempest nickered softly, as if in answer. He lingered in the quiet, letting the comfort of routine soothe him. He mucked out a stall, refilled water buckets, swept the aisle, anything to delay the moment when he'd have to face his thoughts. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying the distant sound of laughter from the manor. As Arthur climbed the stairs to his flat, he paused, looking down at his scarred hands. The rivalry with Marcus, it wasn't just about horses or races or who finished first. It was about something deeper, something neither man could put into words. Pride, fear, the need to be seen, to be whole again. Sleep came in fits and starts, haunted by dreams of falling, of hooves thundering past, of Marcus's voice echoing in the dark. Don't break anything important this time. Morning brought no relief. The news had spread. Arthur Pendelton was riding again, with the so-called mad mare. People whispered in the feed store, in the bakery, in the post office. Some rooted for him, others shook their heads, waiting for another disaster. Arthur ignored them all. He threw himself into training, pushing through the aches and the setbacks, refusing to let Marcus, or his own fear, dictate the outcome. Every day, Tempest tested him, but every day, she led him a little closer. The bond between them, fragile and uncertain, began to feel real. Still, the pressure mounted. Marcus made sure of it, dropping by the stables with sly remarks, boasting about his own horses, hinting that Arthur was living on borrowed time. The local paper ran a story about the comeback kid, complete with a photo from Arthur's glory days, and a headline that made him wince. He clipped the article, stuffing it in the back of the old trophy box, determined not to let it distract him. But the rivalry, once buried, was now front and center. Arthur knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary competition. It was a reckoning, years in the making. One evening, as he finished brushing Tempest, he found a note tucked under the stable door. The handwriting was unmistakable, Marcus's sharp, slashing script. "Hope you're ready for the big leagues again, Arthur. The past has a way of catching up. See you in the ring." Arthur crumpled the note, heart pounding, anger and anxiety warring inside him. For a long moment he stared at Tempest, the only living soul who understood what he was facing. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to be calm. "This time we finish it our way," he said, voice steady. "No more running. No more ghosts." Tempest flicked her ears, muscles bunching as she shifted her weight. Arthur smiled, the old fire burning brighter than it had in years. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the stable doors. Inside, for the first time in a long time, Arthur felt ready. The days blurred together as Arthur and Tempest fell into a new rhythm, one built not on dominance, but on a slow, hard-earned trust. Early mornings became their time. Before the sun had burned the mist off the pastures, Arthur would slip quietly into the stable, carrying a handful of oats or a slice of crisp apple. Tempest was always waiting, ears pricked forward, eyes wary but curious, as if she too felt the change between them. Their training sessions grew longer, stretching into the late afternoon, the two of them moving together beneath the cavernous roof of the indoor arena or out under the vast, ever-changing sky. Sometimes the air smelled of fresh rain, sometimes of new-mown hay. Each day brought new frustrations and small victories. Arthur learned to read the flick of Tempest's tail, the angle of her head, the shift of her weight. She learned to listen to the quiet in his voice, to trust the steadiness of his hands, to give him a little more with each passing hour. Some days, nothing seemed to work. Tempest would balk at the gate, nostrils flaring, muscles bunching in refusal. She would spin away, hooves churning up the dirt, mane flying wild, and Arthur would stand in the center of the ring, patience fraying, fighting not to lose hope. He tried everything, coaxing, cajoling, waiting her out, even, once or twice, raising his voice in sheer exasperation. But those days, Nothing helped. On those days, Arthur trudged back to the barn with leaden limbs, doubting every decision that had brought him here. But there were other days. Days when Tempest surprised him, when she seemed to sense his need as clearly as he sensed hers. On a morning washed with golden light, she let him slip a halter over her head without a fuss. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled in the distance, she followed his lead in a slow, careful circle, matching his steps, her breath steady and calm. The first time she did it without bolting, Arthur felt something in his chest crack open. Not pain, but possibility. One afternoon, rain drummed steadily against the roof as they worked. The world outside was a blur of silver and green, the arena bright with the soft light that came just before a storm. Tempest was on edge, skittish, flinching at every clap of thunder. Arthur almost called it quits, but something in him refused to surrender. He stood his ground, voice gentle, hands loose on the lid. "Easy, girl. We're not running today." Tempest danced sideways, muscles taut, but Arthur held steady, moving with her, not against her. Minutes passed, long and tense. Then, without warning, she stopped, sides heaving, eyes wide but unafraid. She took a trembling step forward, then another, and suddenly she was there, pressing her forehead against Arthur's chest, breathing in his scent, grounding herself in his calm. Arthur stood frozen, rain pounding on the roof, his arms wrapped gently around her neck. For a moment, the past fell away. It was just the two of them, standing together against the storm. He whispered, "We're getting there, aren't we?" In that fragile silence, Arthur felt hope flicker to life. Not the wild, reckless hope of his youth, but a slower, steadier kind, built on shared struggle and small, stubborn courage. He started seeing Tempest differently. She wasn't just a challenge, a problem to solve. She was a companion, a reflection of everything he'd lost and everything he was still fighting to regain. He noticed how her coat gleamed in the sunlight, how her eyes softened when she recognized his voice, how she came to him now, not out of habit, but out of choice. Other people noticed, too. Eleanor began coming to watch their sessions, leaning against the fence, a quiet smile on her lips. She brought thermoses of strong tea, sometimes a sandwich or a slice of cake, always some gentle encouragement. "You two are making progress," she'd say, and Arthur would shrug, embarrassed but grateful. Even Alistair, who usually kept his distance, started dropping by, pretending to check the equipment, but lingering to watch. One afternoon, as Arthur cooled Tempest down after a particularly good session, Eleanor joined him at the ring. "I've never seen her like this," she said softly, nodding at Tempest, who was nuzzling Arthur's sleeve for treats. Arthur offered the mare a piece of apple, smiling as she took it with surprising delicacy. Maybe she just needed someone as stubborn as she is. Eleanor laughed. Well, she certainly found him. She turned serious, lowering her voice. "Arthur, I hope you know how much this means, not just to you, but to all of us." Arthur met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "I think I'm starting to understand." One evening, after a long day of training, Arthur sat in his small flat. The window opened to the sounds of the countryside, the whinny of a foal, the bark of a distant dog, the soft murmur of wind in the trees. He reached for the box of trophies again, but this time he didn't close it in pain. He picked up one of the ribbons, running his fingers over the faded silk, and for the first time allowed himself to remember the good as well as the bad. He realized something had changed. The old fear was still there, Fear of failing, of falling, of being broken all over again. But it wasn't in control anymore. There was something else, stronger. The belief that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this fight. The next morning, he woke before dawn to find Tempest already waiting at the gate, as if eager to start. As he saddled her, she stood quietly, watching him with steady eyes. Arthur felt a surge of pride, tempered by humility. "We're a team now, girl. Win or lose." Training intensified as the tournament approached. There were setbacks. Tempest spooked during a thunderstorm, bolted once when a stray dog ran across the arena, and more than once Arthur found himself lying in the dirt, winded and bruised. But every time he got back up, every time Tempest returned to him, a little quicker, a little more certain. The failures hurt, but the progress was undeniable. One day, a rare visitor stopped by the fence. Marcus Thorne, his rival, arms folded, a smirk twisting his lips. He watched for a few minutes, saying nothing, then drove away, tires spitting gravel. Arthur felt the eyes on his back long after Marcus was gone. It was a warning. The past was not finished with him yet. But he refused to be rattled. He threw himself into the work, letting each session with Tempest push him a little further, a little braver. As the week drew to a close, Arthur and Tempest attempted their most difficult maneuver yet. A tight, controlled canter circle, something Arthur hadn't dared since the accident. Tempest resisted at first, fighting the rain, but Arthur spoke softly, urging her on. Gradually she yielded, muscles relaxing, her stride lengthening into something smooth and graceful. When they completed the circle, Arthur laughed aloud, dizzy with relief and joy. He slid from the saddle, dropping to his knees in the sand, breathless. Tempest, instead of bolting, turned and nudged his shoulder, her breath warm against his cheek. Arthur pressed his forehead to her neck, overcome. "We did it," he murmured. "We really did." Later that evening, Eleanor found him in the barn, still smiling, brushing Tempest's coat until it shone. She didn't say anything at first, just watched as the golden light of sunset filled the stalls. After a while, she spoke quietly. "I think you've both come farther than you know." Arthur nodded, understanding. It wasn't about perfection, not anymore. It was about healing, about learning to trust again, about building something new out of the pieces of what had been broken. That night, for the first time in years, Arthur fell asleep without fear. Out in the pasture, Tempest stood watch under the stars, no longer a wild, angry creature, but something else entirely. A partner, a friend, a symbol of hope. And in the darkness, neither of them was alone. The final week before the Cotswold Open was a fever of preparation and anticipation, each day edged with both dread and excitement. For Arthur, the routine had become a lifeline. Rising before dawn, warming Tempest up in the misty gray, checking every strap, every buckle, every inch of tack for signs of wear. The nerves crept in at the strangest times, when he laced his boots, when he polished his old helmet, when he saw his name on the official roster, printed clean and bold. Eleanor and Alistair cheered him on, their optimism infectious, but the pressure was mounting in ways that only Arthur could feel. The night before the final, the stables were quieter than usual. Most of the staff had already left. The only sounds the shuffle of hooves, the distant calls of nightbirds, the low murmur of Arthur talking to Tempest as he checked her gear for the 100th time. He ran his hands along her back, over her legs, checking for any sign of injury or swelling. The mare was calm, chewing on her hay, occasionally lifting her head to nuzzle his shoulder as if to remind him she was still there, still with him. He closed the stall door gently, leaning against it for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle on his shoulders. In the dim light, the barn looked almost magical. Beams of moonlight slanting through the windows, dust motes drifting like tiny stars. Arthur felt a strange peace, the kind that comes when you know you've done all you can. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded photograph, him as a young man, grinning beside another horse long ago. He smiled, tracing the image with his thumb. "Tomorrow's the day, girl," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "Doesn't matter what anyone says. We made it here together." Tempest snorted softly, eyes half-lidded content. Arthur stood there for a long time, simply breathing, letting himself believe in happy endings. Just this once. He moved through the barn, double-checking every latch and lock, making sure all was secure. He found Eleanor in the tack room, organizing supplies for the morning. She handed him a cup of tea, her expression soft. "Get some rest tonight," she said. "You'll need it." Arthur smiled, tired but genuine. "You too, Eleanor. And thank you for everything." She squeezed his arm, her eyes shining. "You're not alone, Arthur. You never were." He walked her out to her car, watching the taillights disappear down the long driveway, before returning to the barn one last time. The peace from earlier lingered, but it was edged with a strange unease, a prickle at the base of his neck. He shook it off as nerves, blaming the coming competition and Marcus's barbed words still echoing in his mind. Arthur returned to Tempest's stall, whispering quiet encouragement, promising her a fair shot tomorrow, win or lose. He laid a soft blanket over her back, lingered with his hand resting on her shoulder, feeling the steady thump of her heartbeat. The air was thick with expectation. Even Tempest seemed to sense it, standing still, head held high, as if waiting for something. Arthur left the barn for his small flat, forcing himself to relax. He made a sandwich, barely tasted it, then stretched out on the old couch, listening to the steady ticking of the wall clock. His mind drifted back over every setback, every triumph, every step of the journey that had brought him here. The nervousness faded, replaced by a sense of clarity. For the first time in years, Arthur allowed himself to hope, really hope, for something good. He fell asleep easily, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that only comes after months of exhaustion. It was a metallic clang that woke him, sharp and jarring in the darkness. Arthur shot upright, the remnants of peace dissolving instantly. At first he thought he'd dreamed it. Then came another sound, a harsh, scraping noise, followed by the unmistakable bang of a gate against the wall. Heart pounding, Arthur grabbed his flashlight, bolting down the stairs and out into the night. The barn door hung slightly ajar, swinging in the cold wind. The moon was bright, throwing everything into stark relief. Inside, chaos reigned. Several horses stamped in their stalls, eyes rolling in panic. 2 stalls down, a gelding kicked hard against the wood, whinnying in terror. Arthur sprinted for Tempest's stall, the flashlight beam trembling as he ran. He skidded to a stop. The stall door hung open. The heavy-duty latch twisted and broken. The wood splintered where it had been forced open. A bolt cutter, still gleaming, lay discarded in the straw. The stall was empty. Panic clamped down on Arthur's chest, cold and suffocating. He raced through the barn, calling for Tempest, voice echoing off the rafters. "Tempest! Tempest!" He checked every stall, every paddock, running out into the night. but there was no sign of her. The other horses were wild with fear, some rearing, others kicking at their doors. In the distance, he heard a car engine revving, tires spinning on gravel, fading into the darkness. Arthur's mind raced. Who would do this, and why? The answer came bitter and immediate. Marcus. It had to be. No one else had motive. No one else would stoop this low to sabotage him the night before the tournament. Rage, sharp and hot, surged through Arthur, replacing the panic with a cold, clear focus. He ran back to the barn, checking for any clue, any sign. He found a scrap of fabric snagged on the fence. Dark blue, the same shade as Marcus's jacket from the party. He found muddy boot prints leading toward the back entrance, then veering off toward the old service road. He called Alistair, voice shaking with fury and fear. "Tempest is gone! Stolen! I need your help! Now!" Alistair arrived within minutes, still pulling on a jacket. Together they checked the grounds, questioning what little evidence there was. Alistair wanted to call the police, but Arthur shook his head. "There's no time. I know who did this, Marcus. He'll try to move her before the sun comes up, before anyone can stop him." Alistair stared at Arthur, then nodded grimly. "Let's go." They piled into the old Land Rover, headlights slicing through the darkness as they tore down the winding road, every nerve stretched to breaking. Arthur's mind was a blur of anger, fear, and sheer determination. He'd come too far to let Marcus win. Not now. Not like this. Back at the barn, Eleanor woke to the commotion, her heart dropping when she heard what had happened. She rushed to the kitchen, phone in hand, dialing the local police even as Arthur and Alistair sped into the night. Arthur gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened, eyes searching the road ahead for any sign. Tire tracks, broken branches, anything to lead them to Tempest. "We'll find her," he said, more to himself than to Alistair. "We have to." The world outside was cold and silent. The only sound, the roar of the engine, the rush of wind through open windows. Every mile felt like a lifetime. Every second that passed, Arthur's fear deepened, not just for Tempest, but for himself, for everything he was about to lose. They followed the trail as best they could, but the countryside was full of shadows and dead ends. Once, they thought they saw taillights far ahead, only for them to vanish into the night. Arthur felt hope slipping away, replaced by a desperate, gnawing grief. But somewhere inside, he refused to give in. He remembered the look in Tempest's eyes, the feeling of her trust, the bond they'd fought so hard to build. He remembered Eleanor's words, "You're not alone," and clung to them like a lifeline. Back at the barn, Eleanor stroked Tempest's empty halter, tears burning in her eyes, whispering a silent prayer to the darkness. Arthur and Alistair drove on, chasing shadows, hearts pounding. The night had never felt so long, but the fight was far from over. Arthur had never known a night so cold, so endless. The headlights of Alistair's battered Land Rover cut through the darkness, bouncing wildly over ruts and gravel as they tore along the country lanes. Inside the cab, there was no conversation, only the tense, staccato rhythm of Arthur's breath and the low hum of the engine. Every second felt heavy, thick with dread. Outside, the world was all shadows, hedgerows, dry stone walls, the pale blur of sheep startled by their passing. Above them, the sky was a dark dome, stars smudged by clouds. Arthur's mind spun. Images flashed before his eyes. Tempest, wild and afraid. Marcus's smug smile at the party. The empty stall, splintered and violated. The note he'd found, now seeming more like a threat than a taunt. He gripped the door handle until his knuckles blanched, fighting not to shout, not to lose himself to rage and panic. "We'll find her," Alistair said, voice steady, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We have to." Arthur said nothing, but inside, something hardened. The past 24 hours had stripped him bare, torn down every wall he'd built since the accident. Now there was only purpose, the need to bring Tempest home. They scoured every back road, every muddy turnout, searching for any sign. At a crossroads, Arthur spotted a broken branch, tire tracks scoring the verge, the faint glint of something metallic in the weeds. He jumped out, heart hammering, and found a short length of knotted rope, the kind Marcus used at his own stables, a telltale knot tied in the old Romany style favored by horse traders. Arthur held it up, eyes meeting Alistair's in the darkness. "He went this way," Arthur said, voice rough. "He's trying to get her out before sunrise." They turned onto a narrow farm track, branches scraping against the doors, the headlights picking out deep ruts and puddles that reflected the moonlight in broken shards. Far in the distance, a cluster of old barns sat hunched in the valley, their roofs silver with dew. Alistair slowed the truck, engine idling. "That's the old Braddock place," he murmured. "No one rents it now, except maybe someone who wants to keep out of sight." Arthur's pulse jumped. He remembered stories, dodgy horse deals, midnight trades, the sort of lawless activity Marcus had always skirted. He signaled to Alistair, "Kill the lights." The Land Rover rolled forward in darkness, crunching over gravel. They parked behind a tangle of hedges and climbed out quietly, boots sinking into the wet grass. Arthur moved ahead, senses alert, listening for the snort of a horse, the grind of a van door, the low mutter of voices. He heard it, a nervous whicker, followed by the slap of a hand and a low curse. Heart in his throat, Arthur crept forward. Through a gap in the fence, he saw a van with its back doors open, engine running. Tempest, her coat gleaming even in the thin moonlight, stamped and tossed her head, panic in every line of her body. Two men struggled to load her, one big, with a shaved head, the other lean and quick. Arthur's gut twisted, Marcus's hired muscle, and there, standing off to the side, arms folded, face hidden by the brim of his cap, was Marcus himself. Arthur's anger flared. He motioned to Alistair, "Stay back," then slipped through the gap, moving with the careful stealth that came from years in the ring. Tempest saw him first, ears flicking, eyes going wide. Arthur made a soothing sound, soft, familiar, and she stilled, muscles quivering. Marcus looked up sharply, disbelief crossing his face. "You just can't leave well enough alone, can you, Arthur?" Arthur stepped forward, hands raised. "Let her go, Marcus. This isn't a race anymore. This is theft, plain and simple." Marcus laughed, but the sound was brittle, desperate. "She was never yours. You want her? Prove you can take her back." The big man moved, stepping between Arthur and the mare, but Alistair appeared behind him, holding a length of pipe, face grim. "That's enough," he growled. "You want a fight? You'll get one." A tense standoff crackled in the air, seconds stretching. Tempest pawed, swinging her head as Arthur edged closer, voice low and steady. "It's okay, girl. I'm here. We're going home." Marcus spat. "You're a fool, Arthur. You always were. One bad fall and you lost your nerve. You really think a broken-down old man and a wild horse can win anything? You're a joke." Arthur met Marcus's gaze, steady and unyielding. "Maybe I am, but at least I know who I am. You? You're still chasing me after all these years." Marcus lunged, but Alistair intercepted him. The big man wavered, uncertain, then backed off, scowling. In the confusion, Arthur reached Tempest, slipping the halter over her head, murmuring soft encouragement. She shuddered, but let him lead her away, inch by inch, out of the shadow of the van and into the cold starlight. A flash of blue lights lit the lane. Eleanor, standing by a patrol car, had called the police. Officers spilled out, hands on radios, voices urgent. Marcus tried to run, but the big man held him back, caught, finally, by consequences. Tempest trembled beside Arthur, sweat slicking her coat, her eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. Arthur hugged her neck, relief flooding through him so powerfully his knees almost gave way. He looked at Alistair, who managed a weary grin. "You did it, Arthur," Alistair said, clapping his back. "You got her back." Arthur could barely speak. He led Tempest to the waiting trailer, whispering, "We're okay. We're okay. You're safe now." The police took statements, questioned Marcus and his accomplices, then finally let Arthur and Alistair go. The ride home was silent, Tempest dozing on her feet in the back of the trailer, Alistair gripping the wheel, Arthur staring out at the paling sky, wondering if this nightmare had truly ended. They pulled into the yard just as the first light of dawn broke across the fields. Eleanor was waiting, face tear-streaked but triumphant, throwing her arms around Arthur and Tempest both. "I knew you'd bring her back," she whispered. "I never doubted you." Arthur smiled, shaky but genuine. It was close. Too close. They moved Tempest into her stall, settling her with fresh water and a blanket. Arthur brushed her down, every stroke a silent thank you, promising her and himself that he would never let anything like this happen again. Only then, as the sun rose over Cotswold Vale, did the reality settle in. The competition would begin in less than 2 hours. Arthur was exhausted, bruised, running on adrenaline and hope, but he was ready. Tempest, too, stood tall, her spirit unbroken. She watched Arthur with new eyes, eyes that understood pain, trust, and the strength that came from fighting through the darkest night. Arthur looked at his reflection in the stable window, tired, scarred, but alive with purpose. No more running. Today they would step into the ring, not just for glory, but for redemption, for second chances, for each other. The sun warmed the valley, melting the last shadows. Arthur smiled at Tempest, his voice steady for the first time in years. "Let's show them who we really are." The light in Cotswold Vale had changed by the time Arthur finished tending to Tempest. The early haze had given way to the sharp blue of morning, streaks of sun catching the steam that rose from the mare's back as she rested in her stall. The whole barn seemed to vibrate with tension, a strange, coiled energy, as if every animal and human inside was waiting for something to happen. Arthur ran his hands down Tempest's neck one last time, checking for any trace of injury, any hint that her night ordeal had left its mark. She flinched at the first touch, but then relaxed under his palm, letting out a soft sigh. He pressed his forehead gently to her mane, eyes closed. "You're safe now," he whispered. "We made it home." Eleanor hovered nearby, worry etched deep in her face, but she said nothing as Arthur led Tempest out into the dawn. Alistair was already outside, talking with a police officer. Marcus and his accomplices had been taken away in handcuffs, still protesting, still insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But Arthur barely spared them a glance. His focus was entirely on Tempest, on the competition that was set to start in less than an hour, and on the terrible exhaustion dragging at his bones. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a survivor. The world outside was shifting quickly now. Trailers rattled up the drive, competitors arriving in crisp jackets, their horses well rested and gleaming. Arthur heard his name called over the loudspeaker, a subtle reminder that time was slipping away, that the world kept turning whether you were ready or not. He brushed Tempest one last time, whispered something soft, and led her toward the warm-up ring. Every step felt surreal. The crowd was larger than he remembered. Faces pressed against the rail, cell phones raised, the usual murmur of gossip and expectation. Whispers trailed after him. That's Arthur Pendelton. The one who disappeared for years, remember? They say his horse was stolen last night. Arthur ignored them, focusing on Tempest, on the weight and rhythm of his own breathing. His hands shook as he checked the saddle, the bridle, every strap and buckle. Eleanor appeared at his side, slipping a small ribbon into his hand. "For luck," she said, and smiled. He didn't trust himself to speak. He tied the ribbon to Tempest's bridle, where it fluttered like a banner as she tossed her head. A hush fell as he led her into the warm-up arena. The sand was damp and springy underfoot, marked with the hoof prints of a dozen other competitors. Arthur mounted up, heart pounding. For an instant, the saddle felt alien, but then Tempest shifted her weight beneath him, settling, as if to say, "I'm with you." Arthur walked her in slow circles, letting her stretch out, feeling for signs of fatigue. She was jumpy, skittish from the night's ordeal, but when he spoke to her, her ears flicked back, listening, trusting. He pressed his heels gently, and she moved forward, uncertain at first, then more sure. Suddenly a voice cut through the morning. Well, still trying to play the hero, Arthur?" He looked up to see Marcus, somehow already changed into his show clothes, leaning against the rail. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, but his smile was as sharp as ever. "Didn't think you'd actually show your face after last night. Most men would have taken the hint and gone home." Arthur met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm not most men." Marcus snorted, glancing pointedly at Tempest. "You really think that bag of nerves is going to carry you through?" She looks half wild. "You look half dead." A muscle twitched in Arthur's jaw. "At least I know how to fight for what matters." Marcus's eyes narrowed. For a moment the world shrank to the two of them, locked in a silent battle. Then Marcus straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "We'll see," he said, and turned away, his words floating back over his shoulder. "May the best man win." Arthur watched him go, heart hammering. He knew what Marcus was capable of now. Not just dirty tricks in the ring, but real, calculated sabotage. He looked at Tempest, felt her trembling beneath him, and knew he couldn't afford to let anger or fear cloud his focus. He walked her for another 10 minutes, letting the tension drain from her muscles, talking to her in a low, steady voice. Gradually, she calmed, her steps lengthening, her head dropping, her trust rebuilding. Around them, other competitors came and went, their faces a blur. When the steward signaled that it was time, Arthur guided Tempest toward the in-gate. The crowd quieted, sensing the drama in the air. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, and felt his old instincts kick in. The mental checklist, the steadying ritual. As he rode past the judges' stand, he caught sight of Eleanor and Alistair, standing side by side, hands clasped. Their presence steadied him. He touched Tempest's neck, feeling her heart beating in time with his own. The announcer's voice echoed over the loudspeakers, calling his name, introducing him and Tempest to the arena. The world seemed to contract to the size of the ring. The gleaming white rails, the freshly raked sand, the colored jumps standing like sentinels. Arthur swallowed, then gave Tempest the signal. They entered together, moving with purpose, drawing the attention of every spectator. There was a moment of silence, a collective breath, as the crowd recognized the stakes. Then, slowly, applause began to build, scattered at first, then swelling as Arthur and Tempest took their place at the start. Arthur could feel the eyes on him, Marcus's glare, the judge's scrutiny, the crowd's hope and doubt. But none of it mattered. All that existed was the horse beneath him and the challenge ahead. He looked down at Tempest, felt her gather herself beneath him, and for the first time in a long time, felt a surge of joy, fierce and unashamed. "Let's do this," he whispered. The bell rang, sharp and clear. Arthur squeezed his legs gently, and Tempest surged forward, powerful and alive. The first jump came up quickly, a simple vertical, and she cleared it easily, ears pricked. Arthur steadied her, guiding her to the next obstacle, feeling the old rhythm return. The course was long and demanding, designed to test both horse and rider. Tempest balked once, hesitating at a tricky combination, but Arthur soothed her, speaking quietly, guiding her through. Each success built her confidence, and by the halfway mark, they were moving as one, the crowd's excitement growing with every clean jump. But Marcus was waiting for him at the far end of the ring, standing just beyond the last fence, arms folded, eyes cold. Arthur saw him out of the corner of his eye, saw the slight shake of his head, the silent dare. Arthur ignored him. He rode Tempest forward, clearing the final jump, landing light and free. The crowd erupted, cheers and applause rolling over them like thunder. Arthur circled Tempest, letting her slow, letting her breathe. He looked up into the stands, saw Eleanor and Alistair beaming, saw strangers clapping, saw hope reflected back at him from 100 faces. For the first time, Arthur felt the past loosen its grip. He leaned down, hugged Tempest's neck, and let himself believe, really believe, that he belonged here. He rode from the ring to the sound of his name echoing in the morning air. But he knew the fight wasn't over. There was still one final challenge to come. The crowd's applause faded behind Arthur as he led Tempest back to the barn, his mind still whirling with adrenaline and disbelief. The world seemed brighter, sharper, every sound, every color heightened after their ride. For a few glorious minutes, Arthur allowed himself to bask in the sense of victory. He'd made it through the ordeal, had shown Tempest and himself that together they could rise above their ghosts. He whispered, "You were incredible, girl," stroking her sweat-darkened neck as she leaned gratefully into his hand. But the celebration was cut short. As Arthur moved to unsaddle Tempest, a steward jogged up, worry creasing his brow. "Arthur, there's a problem. Your slot in the finals, they've already closed entries. You missed your official start. The rules say—" Arthur stared at him, the words slow to register. The blood drained from his face. "We just rode. The crowd saw—" The steward shook his head, eyes apologetic. "That was only the qualifying round. The finals are about to begin. Officially, you weren't checked in after the incident last night. I'm sorry." Rage and despair surged through Arthur all at once. After everything, after the long night, the rescue, the warm-up, it seemed as if fate was determined to rob him of his second chance. "No, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Eleanor appeared, out of breath, eyes blazing. "What's going on?" Arthur explained in clipped, bitter sentences, barely able to meet her gaze. Tempest, sensing his distress, nickered anxiously. Eleanor listened, then squared her shoulders, a fierce determination settling over her features. "Stay here. Take care of Tempest. I'll fix this." Before Arthur could protest, she strode away, heading straight for the judge's tent. He watched her go, hope flickering painfully in his chest. He busied himself with Tempest, unbuckling the girth, wiping sweat from her flanks, whispering soothing words. But his hands shook, and every passing minute felt like a nail in the coffin of his dreams. Inside the judge's tent, Eleanor faced a wall of skepticism. The chief steward, a severe woman with a reputation for strictness, shook her head as Eleanor made her plea. "Rules are rules, Mrs. Finch. Mr. Pendelton missed the official check-in." Eleanor refused to back down. "He didn't just miss it. His horse was stolen. He spent the night chasing down thieves, risking his own safety to bring her back. You saw the police report. You know what happened." The steward pursed her lips, unmoved. "It's tragic, yes, but this isn't a charity. We have schedules, sponsors, insurance. If we make an exception—" Eleanor leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Listen to me. This isn't about insurance or sponsors. This is about integrity, about doing what's right. Everyone here knows Arthur's story. They've watched him fight his way back from hell. If you deny him a chance now, after everything he's overcome, what does that say about us? About this competition?" Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with passion. Around the tent, other officials began to murmur, some nodding, some looking away. "Think of what this means to everyone watching," Eleanor pressed on. "Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. Sometimes you have to make room for a little bit of grace." For a long moment, silence. The chief steward looked away, then back at Eleanor, weighing her words. Finally she sighed. "One round, after the last competitor. But if Mr. Pendelton isn't ready, if there's any issue, it's over." Eleanor's face broke into a relieved, tearful smile. "Thank you. Thank you. You won't regret this." She rushed from the tent, nearly colliding with Arthur in her haste. He caught her by the shoulders. "Well, they'll let you ride. One slot at the very end. You'd better be ready." Arthur's knees nearly buckled with relief. He hugged her fiercely. "I don't know what I'd do without you." She just smiled, brushing away a tear. "Just ride your heart out. For all of us." Back in the barn, Arthur threw himself into preparing Tempest. The mare was exhausted but alert, her coat gleaming from Eleanor's quick grooming. Alistair arrived, carrying a flask of coffee and a look of grim pride. "You're a stubborn old fool," he said, clapping Arthur on the back. "But I wouldn't bet against you today." Arthur grinned, some of the old fire returning to his eyes. "Wouldn't be the first time I've made a fool of myself in public." As the final competitor rode into the ring, a hush fell over the crowd. Arthur and Tempest waited in the tunnel, listening to the distant roar of applause. The steward signaled. His time had come. Arthur mounted up, hands steady now. He looked into Tempest's eyes, seeing not the wild, fearful animal of months ago, but a true partner. Nervous, yes, but ready. He patted her neck. "We made it, girl. This is our moment." They entered the arena to a silence so complete it felt sacred. Every eye was on them, supporters, skeptics, old rivals, new friends. Somewhere in the stands, Marcus sat, his face a storm of anger and disbelief. Arthur didn't spare him a glance. He let Tempest walk a circle, feeling her stride, letting her settle. The judges nodded, signaling the start. Arthur breathed in, slow and deep, then gave the signal. Tempest surged forward, finding strength in reserves Arthur hadn't dared hope for. The first jump loomed, a wide oxer, daunting even on a good day. But Tempest cleared it with room to spare, landing light and sure. The course was a brutal test. Tight turns, high rails, a triple combination at the far end. Tempest balked once, snorting in fear at a red and white plank. Arthur steadied her, voice gentle, legs firm, and she tried again, clearing it as the crowd let out a collective breath. Each fence came faster now, Tempest growing bolder, Arthur sharper, the two moving as one. Sweat darkened her chest, but she kept fighting, never hesitating, never giving in to the fear that had once ruled them both. At the final jump, Arthur heard Eleanor's voice, soft but certain. "For all of us." He urged Tempest on, and she responded with every ounce of heart she had left. They cleared the last fence to an eruption of cheers, the kind that swelled and rolled, shaking the very stands. Arthur circled Tempest, letting her slow, letting her breathe. He looked up, tears stinging his eyes, and saw Alistair pumping his fist in the air, Eleanor hugging herself in relief, strangers cheering and clapping. It didn't matter what the judges said. It didn't matter if they'd won or lost. Arthur slipped from the saddle, wrapped his arms around Tempest's neck, and whispered, "We did it. We came home." In that moment, he was free, not just from Marcus, not just from the shadows of the past, but from every doubt, every fear that had ever held him back. And as the sun set behind the grandstand, painting the sky with gold, the world felt new again, full of hope, full of possibility. The hush that fell over the arena was electric. As Arthur waited with Tempest at the edge of the ring, the sky outside the open doors had turned the color of old gold, streaked with the first hints of dusk. The crowd, exhausted by a day of competition, now held its collective breath, every eye fixed on the man and horse who had become living legend in a single day. Arthur steadied himself, letting the reins slip through his fingers, feeling the slick warmth of Tempest's sweat. His whole body thrummed with fatigue and nervous anticipation. In the stands, Eleanor and Alistair sat pressed together, watching, their hands clasped. Even the judges, so stern and by the book, seemed caught up in the weight of the moment. He closed his eyes, just for a heartbeat, and was transported. He was 23 again, the crowd roaring, the sunlight burning hot on his neck. The memory came in a flood. The start bell, the pounding hooves, the fateful jump that sent him tumbling, the sickening snap, the taste of dirt and blood. For a split second, Arthur's chest seized. His leg throbbed with the old phantom pain. His breath stuttered. Would he fail again? Would Tempest pay the price for his own brokenness? Then he opened his eyes, and Tempest was there. Her wild face turned toward him, her ears pricked. She stamped the sand, impatience and trust shining in her gaze. In that moment, Arthur understood. This wasn't about proving himself to anyone. Not Marcus, not the judges, not the ghosts in his own head. It was about this connection, this dance between two survivors. He reached down and pressed his hand to her neck, feeling the powerful life beneath her skin. "Let's write our own ending," he whispered, voice trembling. The bell rang. The world shrank to the arena, the white rails, the glossy obstacles, the hush of the crowd. Arthur set Tempest into a collected canter, seat deep, hands soft, every muscle attuned to hers. The first jump approached, a double combination. Tempest surged, clearing it with inches to spare, landing light, eager for more. Arthur felt the rhythm, 1, 2, 3, horse and man, every stride a heartbeat, every fence a promise. The first half of the course melted away beneath them, Tempest responding to every cue, ears flicking back, confidence growing with every jump. Arthur hardly noticed the spectators. The ring might have been empty, the world silent save for the pounding of her hooves and his own breath. Midway through the course, the triple, an echo of that day so long ago. Arthur saw the obstacle rise before him, the rails impossibly high. For a moment, fear clawed at him. What if it happened again? What if Tempest fell? What if he failed her the way he had failed himself? He heard the voice of his younger self, brittle with doubt. But then, over the roar of memory, came something else. Eleanor's quiet faith, Alistair's hard-won pride, and Tempest's steady presence beneath him. Arthur whispered, "I trust you. I trust us." He gathered Tempest for the approach, feeling her muscles coil beneath him. The first rail they cleared easily. The second, she hesitated. A tiny, desperate moment, but Arthur sat deep, legs strong, hands steady. "Go on, girl," Tempest launched, scraping the rail but making it over. The crowd gasped. One more jump. This one, the final test. It was the very same maneuver, the high oxer, that had ended his career all those years ago. Arthur felt the world go silent. He let the reins slip, gave Tempest her head, and trusted. They soared. For a heartbeat they hung in the air, past and present, pain and hope, all suspended together. Tempest landed sure-footed, gathering herself as Arthur let out a ragged, joyful laugh. The rest of the course flew by in a blur. Each jump was met, each turn navigated by instinct and faith. Tempest's sides heaved. Foam flecked her bit, but she never faltered. Arthur rode her with everything he had left, burning through the exhaustion, letting the rhythm carry him. They finished the last fence, and suddenly the arena exploded in noise. Cheers, applause, the stamping of feet. Arthur pulled Tempest to a halt, tears blurring his vision. He let the reins fall and wrapped his arms around her neck, pressing his face into her mane. The crowd was still cheering, but for Arthur there was only this: gratitude, relief, wonder. He dismounted slowly, legs shaky, and stood beside Tempest, running his hand along her neck, whispering nonsense words of praise. The judges conferred, then announced their score, but Arthur barely heard it. Tempest had done it. They had done it. Together. Eleanor burst from the crowd, rushing to his side. She threw her arms around him, sobbing and laughing all at once. Alistair, grinning from ear to ear, thumped him on the back. "You mad, stubborn old goat!" he shouted over the noise. "I knew you had it in you!" Arthur could only laugh, the sound raw, triumphant, a release of everything he'd held inside for so long. From the far end of the arena, Marcus watched, face thunderous, lips pressed into a hard, white line. For once, he said nothing. The rivalry that had shaped so much of Arthur's life seemed suddenly small, inconsequential. Arthur met his gaze for a moment. No bitterness, no challenge, just a quiet, final acceptance. The officials called for him, and Arthur led Tempest forward for the presentation. The crowd parted around them, people reaching out to touch the mare, to clap him on the shoulder, to whisper words of congratulations. It didn't matter that their round was not the most technically perfect. The connection, the courage, the story, the crowd recognized what mattered most. Standing in the golden light, ribbon in hand, Arthur felt the last of the weight slip from his shoulders. He turned to Eleanor and Alistair, to Tempest, to the crowd, and let his gratitude shine. He'd come home at last. As the sky darkened, as the first stars appeared above the valley, Arthur realized he was no longer running from the past. He was dancing into the future, with Tempest by his side. The last golden rays of sunlight stretched across the valley, casting long shadows that reached all the way to the stables. The competition had ended. The crowd was drifting home in loose, happy clusters, some still talking about Arthur and Tempest, some lost in their own thoughts, others just savoring the feeling that something meaningful had happened in the dusty little arena that day. The excitement, the noise, the weight of expectation, all of it was gone, replaced by a deep, lingering hush. Arthur moved slowly through the barn, each step echoing with a kind of exhausted joy. He felt the ache in his muscles, the old twinge in his leg, but there was no bitterness left in him. Instead, he felt a calm that ran deeper than any pain, a sense of belonging that he hadn't known since he was a young man. Before fame, before the fall, before the long years of hiding. Tempest walked beside him, her stride loose and relaxed. Every sign of the wildness from those first weeks now softened into strength. She was tired too, but every so often she'd toss her head, the little blue ribbon from Eleanor still fluttering at her bridle. He paused at her stall, sliding the door open and leading her inside. The stable was quiet except for the soft rustling of straw, the contented sighs of horses settling in for the night. Arthur removed the tack with gentle hands, unbuckling straps, laying the saddle and bridle on the rail. He brushed Tempest slowly, letting the rhythm of the strokes calm them both. Each pass of the brush was a kind of meditation, a reminder that this, more than any trophy or title, was what he loved. A partnership built day by day, rebuilt from pain and patience, and the steady, unspoken language of trust. Eleanor joined him a little while later, carrying 2 mugs of hot tea. She set one on the edge of the stall and sipped from the other, watching in silence. Arthur glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. There were no words left to say. All the fear and hope, the gratitude and the heartbreak had already been shared in 1,000 small moments. Eleanor put her free hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "You look peaceful," she said quietly. Arthur nodded, exhaling a long, deep breath. "I am, for the first time in a long while." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Tempest is lucky to have you." He shook his head, brushing a hand along Tempest's neck. "I think we saved each other." The sun had almost disappeared now, the sky washed with indigo and fire. Alistair appeared in the doorway, his coat slung over one arm, his tie askew, but his face beaming with pride. "You've done it, Arthur. Win or lose, it doesn't matter. You brought this place back to life." Arthur looked at his old friend, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside. Maybe it was never about the competition. Maybe it was just about coming home. They stood together, silent as the last light faded, each lost in his own thoughts. In the stillness, Arthur remembered all the nights he'd spent alone in this barn, haunted by regret, by the feeling that his best days were behind him. Now, that sorrow felt far away, a different lifetime, belonging to someone else. After a while, Eleanor slipped away to finish her evening chores, and Alistair wandered off to lock the front gates. Arthur stayed with Tempest, rubbing her ears, humming a tune from his childhood. The peace between them was so complete that it felt sacred. At last, as darkness settled in, Arthur gave Tempest a final pat and turned to leave. He paused, looking back at her as she dropped her head to munch quietly on her hay. There was no fanfare, no spotlights, just the warm yellow glow from a single overhead lamp and the slow, steady sound of a horse at peace. He stepped out into the yard. The night air was cool, scented with grass and wood smoke from distant chimneys. Arthur wandered toward the far fence, where the land sloped away to the valley and leaned against a gate. Crickets sang, and in the distance the faint laughter of children drifted up from the village. He closed his eyes, letting all of it wash over him. The sounds, the scents, the feeling of being alive. Right here, right now. He thought of the old trophies still packed away in their box. He'd won more medals than he could count in his youth, but none of them had brought him what he felt now. A sense of wholeness, of forgiveness, of acceptance. The ghosts of the past had lost their hold. He wasn't a champion or a failure, or the man who'd once been broken on the track. He was just Arthur, a horseman, a friend, a man who had found his way back. A gentle voice called from behind him, Eleanor holding out his cup of tea. "You should come inside. It's getting cold." Arthur smiled, following her back to the house. The kitchen was bright, the table laid for supper, the windows steamed against the night. Alistair poured wine, and they sat together, sharing the meal in comfortable silence. Laughter bubbling up at odd moments. Memories of the day already turning into the stories they would tell for years to come. Later, as the house quieted and the others drifted off to bed, Arthur lingered by the window, looking out at the moonlit paddocks. Tempest grazed contentedly under the stars, her silhouette strong and calm. He raised his glass in a silent toast, not to victory, but to second chances, to forgiveness, to all the broken things that could, with time and patience, be made whole again. His heart was light as he turned away, heading up the stairs to his room, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, he had nothing left to prove and nothing left to fear. The journey had been long, painful, and uncertain, but it had brought him here, to himself, to his friends, to a peace he thought he'd lost forever. Down in the yard, Tempest lifted her head, as if sensing his gaze. Arthur smiled, a single tear slipping down his cheek, not of sorrow, but of joy. Sometimes, the greatest prize isn't a ribbon or a trophy. Sometimes it's simply the knowledge that you found your way home. As the house grew still, Arthur let himself rest at last.